The story begins in 1974 in a small village near Saratov, Russia. My grandfather, Viktor Ivanovich, was a proud, hard-working mechanic. He had a knack for fixing anything, from tractors to samovars, and his hands were always stained with grease. But his real pride and joy wasn't a machine. It was his wristwatch. The watch was a Poljot, one of the finest Soviet-made brands, with glowing hands and numbers that made it easy to read in the dark. My grandfather loved that watch, not just for its practicality, but because it made him feel important. After all, not everyone could afford a luminous watch back then. The first time I saw the watch, I was a little boy. Grandpa showed it off like it was a treasure. "See this," he said, holding it up so I could see the faint green glow in the darkened room. "This is no ordinary watch. It glows so I can see it even in the middle of the night." To me, it looked magical. I didn't know then that the glow came from radium, a radioactive element used in paint to make watches luminous. And neither did my grandfather. He just knew it was reliable, tough, and made him the envy of his coworkers. He wore that watch every day without fail. Whether he was repairing a tractor or working late into the night, the Poljot was always strapped to his wrist, glowing faintly in the dim light of the garage. But over the years, something strange started to happen. It began with a small red patch on his wrist, right where the watch rested. At first he didn't think much of it, just a rash, maybe from the sweat and grease of his work. But the rash didn't go away. It grew darker, turning into a burn-like mark that seemed to eat into his skin. My grandmother Lyudmila begged him to see a doctor. "Vitya," she said, "what if it's serious? You can't just ignore it." But my grandfather was stubborn. "It's nothing," he said, waving her off. "Probably just an allergy." He kept wearing the watch even as the mark grew worse, until the skin around his wrist became raw and painful. Eventually it got so bad that he had no choice but to see a doctor. He showed them the wound, and the doctor asked, "Do you wear anything on this wrist?" "Just my watch," my grandfather replied. The doctor examined the watch and frowned. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Why? Is something wrong?" my grandfather asked, his voice suddenly uneasy. The doctor explained that the luminous paint on the watch hands contained radium, a radioactive substance that was once considered harmless, but over time the radiation could cause burns, sickness, and even cancer. "You need to stop wearing this immediately," the doctor said, "and I'd recommend getting rid of it entirely." My grandfather was stunned. He couldn't believe that something as simple as a watch could be dangerous, but the evidence was there, etched into his skin. Reluctantly, he took off the watch and left it at home. But he didn't throw it away. To him, it was still a valuable possession, and throwing it out felt like a betrayal of all the years it had served him faithfully. Instead, he put it in a box and tucked it away in the attic. For years, the watch sat forgotten in the attic. My grandfather's wrist slowly healed, though the burn mark never completely faded. It became a strange sort of scar, both physical and emotional, a reminder of how even small things could carry hidden dangers. Years later, after my grandfather passed away, my father and I were cleaning out the attic. That's when we found it, the Poljot, still ticking faintly, its hands glowing as if nothing had happened. "This was your grandfather's favorite watch," my father said, holding it up. "He used to call it his lucky charm." "Lucky," I said, pointing at the faint burn mark on his wrist in an old family photo. "It almost killed him." My father nodded. "True, but it also reminds us of how much we didn't know back then. We trusted things we shouldn't have." We decided to keep the watch, not as a keepsake to wear, but as a reminder of a different time. We put it in a glass case where it still sits to this day, glowing faintly in the dark, a quiet echo of the past.
Victor's story is a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of ignorance and the things we take for granted. A simple wristwatch, something so ordinary, carried risks no one could have imagined. What about you? Do you have an item in your family with a story behind it? Something cherished, but maybe dangerous or strange? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me, Mr. Your Bunny wrote, for more tales of history, resilience, and curiosity. Until next time, till